Thank you guys for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Barry O'Connell from Trustwave, and this is our podcast or vodcast as part of our project with Trustwave, with the UK and Ireland CISO Alliances community around risk resilience and reputation, CISO and the board. And this is coming just after the report will be released to the community. So thank you for joining us, Barry. Can you just give us a quick overview of who you are, first of all? I know a lot of the community would have known you from the engagement in the project, but if you could just give us a little overview of who you are and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Well, thanks, James, for having me in the first case. It's really good to catch up again and discuss some of the findings that came out of the report that we did a few months ago now. I'm Barry O'Connell. I am the General Manager for Trustwave for EMEA. I'm effectively responsible for our commercial and operational activity in Europe and the Middle East. I've been working with Trustwave for 5 years now, which surprises me when I say that. And over those 5 years, we've effectively grown from a pure play cybersecurity company focused on managed security services through to consulting, and we have a couple of products that we sell in the mail and database space. So pretty much cover the full spectrum end to end of security within Trustwave, and we supply clients that are large enterprises all the way through to medium enterprises and governments.
Brill. Awesome. I appreciate that, Larry. Thank you. So I just want to move on to the project that we've done with you guys that we ran in over the last couple of months, which included starting with a intelligence questionnaire going out to the community. We had digital chapter, physical chapter, as well as a few interviews with the community, delving further into those questions. How did you find the engagement of the community, first of all? You know, because you were on our digital chapters and our physical chapters that we ran for this project. How did you find that? From your point of view, compared to other activities maybe that you've done with that engagement from the community?
Yeah, I think it was great. I mean, in terms of the ability to get with people who are living, breathing this stuff day to day. Very often when we're engaging as a community, particularly a broad-based like the CISO Alliance, is we're often talking about particular issues we're trying to resolve. We're often talking about a particular point solution. It was just really good to get some headspace around what is, I think, an important topic and something we don't necessarily talk about on a day-to-day basis, but kind of forms the context for how we all work. Around the executive team that governs how we work as organizations. So to get the community to get some time, 2 or 3 events out of the working day. I felt privileged to be able to do that, and I felt that the contribution and the engagement from the community was really refreshing. Everybody wanted to contribute and make a point about what they feel as being some of the issues around the topic. So it was really refreshing to take that time out. I think we, as cybersecurity professionals, we don't get often the time to do that. We're often struggling with the kind of tyranny of the urgent, whatever the latest and greatest issue is we have to deal with. So to have that opportunity, I felt was a real privilege to work with the group in that way.
Bro, yeah, it's great to hear that, because the CISO Alliances is, these guys and girls get together, not to have sales pitches and so forth, which was great from a Trustwave point of view, because it was all about the topic. We didn't mention Trustwave and what they do. It was all around that topic, with you guys being able to sort of guide that conversation and put in your 2 pence as well. So with the report that's obviously been done off the back of all these activities we've done for the project, I remember speaking to you before we even started the project, and you had your views on sort of what you were expecting to see in there and stuff like that from previous conversations. Is there anything in that report that you would say has surprised you that's come from the community?
I'm not sure there's anything that was too surprising. Maybe there's a couple of points that were emphasised that underline or underscored some of the thinking that we'd had in kind of one-on-one conversations. And again, just going back to the community, very often these conversations are one-on-one conversations. So have the ability to have the group conversation, I think, added a lot to the the process. But I think there's maybe a couple of takeaways. One is that when I looked at the data, almost every question was the response was a perfect bell curve, so a normal distribution. So you had maybe 10-20% either end of whatever the question was. The extreme, we do it excellently, we don't do it well at all, and then the majority in the middle. And that to me kind of indicates, just purely from a data perspective, is that we are seeing a maturing of this conversation. So it's not like it's skewed heavily one way or the other. So we do things terribly or we do things really well. It was a perfect distribution almost to every question. So I think that highlights two things. One is that within a large group, and there's over 100 CISOs, right? So within a large group, you'd expect that normal distribution. What I didn't expect is for this particular question to follow a normal distribution. I thought there would be a lot more of a skew towards the lower end in terms of things like preparedness, things like the board awareness. It was pretty normal distribution across the piece for every question. So that was maybe more of a surprise in terms of how the data actually determined where we are in terms of maturity. I think the other thing as well, and this is probably more through the interviews and conversations and maybe experiences that I have had outside of this when we've discussed this topic, is that the interaction between the CISO and the board, and I think we during our conversation, we broadened the definition of board to mean almost executive team, right? So it's not talking about necessarily technically the board, but basically the governance structures within organizations, is that the cybersecurity capability and the way in which the topic is discussed is very much a reflection of the overall culture of the organization within the context of cybersecurity. So what I mean by that is that we have got within the CISO community, I think, a variety of thoughts and ideas in terms of how we should interact more successfully and succinctly with our executive teams. But it's largely governed by the broader culture of those organizations. And maybe I could give an example. So we do work for organizations, and you take a couple of large enterprises where we do more or less the same thing. So it's basically, one of these, the example I'm thinking of, it's a lot around offensive security. So it's things like pen testing, proactive threat hunting, those kinds of things. And these are both very large organizations. Both CISOs are switched on. They understand the topic that we're talking about. They understand some of the things that we've discovered in the in the survey. But what I found is that the response to that and how they go about deploying the remediation is very different. So you've got one example where the board and senior level are really engaged in the topic. If you read the annual report, they mention cybersecurity as being a predominant focus for them in terms of their next year's investments and so on. They're in the financial services, so you kind of might expect that. And what happens is that when we identify things like, we need to go and get this particular piece of code change or whatever it might be to remediate the particular problem we found, a particular vulnerability, it happens in a really short period of time. The business is bought into it. They understand what's going on. Take the other example where the individual is as smart or as bright and as aware as the other individual and understands this topic, but they have a very decentralized culture in their organization, and therefore deploying and mitigating these risks and remediating these risks is extremely challenging for them. So I think, my takeaway, one of the takeaways is that while we've had really good discussion around this, and I think, as I say, there's kind of a normal distribution in terms of these are the things we know we should be doing. Sometimes we're doing them, sometimes we're not. Actually deploying them within the organizations that we're working for varies tremendously based upon the culture and approach to cybersecurity at
Yeah.
a much broader level than the operational activities that we're responsible for. So I thought that was kind of came through, I think, in a lot, not so much in the data, but came through in the interviews that we did as well. And I think that when people see the report, yes, read the data because it's interesting and makes nice PowerPoints and so on. But a lot of the value in the report is actually in the interviews and the observations that individuals make given their own specific situations.
Yeah, I remember the physical chapter that we did, and we had this conversation, and it came up quite a lot, didn't it, around culture? And there was a lot of examples of previous roles that they were in with different organizations, not necessarily where they were right now, but that evolution of different cultures in different roles. Going back 5-6 years was completely different to what it is now within the roles that they're in. And I think they tied that quite nicely back to that relationship side of things, of building those relationships with the wider executive team, not just the board, and making sure that they had those relationships with people that would understand the need for cybersecurity to be on the agenda was a big point as well.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a really good observation. Now, also, we don't have the data from 5 years ago, but it would be, we can maybe extrapolate based on our own experiences. But my guess is that in the last 5 years, there's been a maturing of the cybersecurity function from, the person that used to monitor the network and manage the network in a cupboard somewhere to being this conversation that is now top of mind. As to say, in this example, one of the examples I'm thinking of, one of the companies that we talked to mentioned cybersecurity as a predominant part of their introduction to their annual report. I mean, I don't think that would have happened 5 years ago.
No.
So there is that, and I think that you're picking up on the cultural thing. I think that's it's maybe a bit of a nebulous topic, culture, but it absolutely has a real impact. And I think that what we do is when we look at this as a community, I think we're very comfortable in terms of, certainly getting better at, and I think this is something that comes through the report, getting better at understanding the organizational strategy. So, what's the core focus for the organization? What is the strategy that the organization is trying to pursue as an outcome from the efforts of that particular organization, whether it be financial services or transport, whatever it is, the core businesses, and understanding how cybersecurity fits with that strategy. I think that there is evidence in the report that we're getting more sophisticated at having that conversation. Like I say, a lot of this, there's a very nice bell curve that says some people are better at doing it than others, but there's a lot in the middle that are doing it well. I think we use words like moderate and good and those kinds of things in the report, where you see 30% of people are doing it well, moderate, good, and then there's 10% either end where we need to make improvements because we're not where we need to be, or that we're doing it really, really well because it's a key takeaway. I did notice in the report as well that 7% of organizations had a non-executive director on their board specifically for security. Honestly, when you ask me, is that a surprise? I don't know if it's a surprise or not a surprise. It's just interesting that, obviously as professionals, we have a leaning towards the importance of cybersecurity, and clearly some organizations, it's only 7%, but you could say even 7% is a good start where this has been taken seriously with some external help and focus. So I thought that was an interesting observation.
So just on that point there, then, Barry, when it comes to obviously, this is all about getting the cybersecurity agenda onto the, and with the board and the executive team. This report is obviously going to be ideal for current CISOs and potential CISOs coming up now, cybersecurity professionals that are coming up and want to be sort of CISOs in the future. But I'm just going to throw a curveball at you now and just get your opinion on this. How do you see this report being able to help that executive team, for them to read it, not just CISOs and cyber professionals to read it, but do you see it having an impact and well, hopefully having an impact on that executive team to understand from their cybersecurity teams and from their CISO's point of view how they can improve and maybe move up from moderate to good, or move from good to doing it well, to make sure that it's on the agenda?
Look, I think that's one of the key takeaways of the report. I mean, I think that one of the reasons for doing the research in the first place is it's great seeing the data, great understanding the data, and it's like any survey is going to have nuances in it. So, for example, I think one of the nuances that I think is probably worthwhile us delving into a little bit is where the CISO reports. So, 45% of the population didn't report into a CEO, CIO, legal department, COO. I've kind of run out of thinking where they might report. Yeah, 45% of them don't. So I don't know. There's some nuances like that I think we should maybe try and understand. But I would say that you're generally looking at the report where individuals report is, in terms of their reporting lines, probably makes very little difference in terms of their effectiveness, right? I mean, it's more that broader cultural piece. So what I would suggest is that the individuals that filled in that the survey and then looking at the report on an aggregate level is to really understand if an honest assessment of am I really good? Am I really prepared for a breach? Does the board or the executive team take cybersecurity seriously enough? And almost score my organization against that. Kind of maybe do a sort of a second pass on that and a little bit more thoroughly on that, and then write down why. So why do you think that? What is it? What evidence base do you have that suggests you think you're good, or you think you're excellent, or you think you're weak, whatever that is? And none of those answers are bad, by the way. It's a reflection of where you are and the level of maturity. Then I think if you write down that, like, why is it you think you're positioned in those areas, then what would be the action plan against those points, either to enhance them or to remove them, whatever the issue happens, if there's an issue that is blocking you from having those the kind of maturity you want, and almost build yourself almost a little bit of a maturity matrix for yourself. Is where do I need to improve? What do I need to do to make that happen? If I go back to a couple of examples, what I see a lot is CISOs that have been burnt out. Sometimes physically, burnt out. They've had enough. They've basically said, I just can't get the organization to behave how I want them to, and I'm banging my head against a brick wall to get things done. And then the other end of the spectrum, CISOs that say, no, I have board meetings all the time, and I'm engaged and energized by that. And I think that it's that, if you can't get things done in an organization that you think is required for maturing the cybersecurity within that probably indicates, kind of a really good set of activities that you either need to do, whether it be to develop individual relationships or whatever it might be, to get that to happen. And then, again, without being too much sort of glass half empty on this, is that I do want to emphasize again that the ability to get change to happen in an organization, whether it be cybersecurity or anything else, it is governed by the overall culture of that organization and willingness to get change to happen. So I think there's I think there's a danger of us getting to a position whereby we have too many or too high expectations or priorities around where we need to go, and rather than understanding the more detailed, well, what do I actually need to do to get things to move in the right direction, and understand how that works in your organization and how that works for you as an individual. And like I say, almost get to the point where you've got a list of items that you think you need to do to be able to move that forward, and then plan for that accordingly.
Bro, yeah. There's some really interesting stats and stuff that's come back from what the community have said in the report. But is there anything in there that didn't surprise you, that you were sort of expecting to see, that you were like, yeah, that's sort of my experience? So, over the last couple of years of speaking to CISOs.
Yeah, I think this. this awareness amongst the CISO community, and again, the value of a network like the CISO Alliance is that you get this variety of opinions, and like any network or any sort of set of relationships, you kind of coalesce around a few sort of truths, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that didn't really surprise me, or wasn't necessarily something I didn't expect to see, but was the maturity of the community in terms of understanding what needed to be done. This is
Yeah.
not. This is not an intellectual exercise. It's not a kind of, here's some hypotheses that I think we need to go and work out whether they're the right things or not. People know what to do. I think it goes maybe back to the last point about, how do I move from good to better, is we know what we need to do. We just have challenges with actually executing that within the organizational context within which we find ourselves. Not all the time, but I think that's so. If you were to and go back to the normal distribution, the perfect bell curve, that's just a great example of something that is mature. You wouldn't get that output of something that was really immature. So that sense that we have as a community, that we are as a community maturing, and the organizations that we work with are maturing, the executive teams and boards that we work with are maturing. I think our frustration probably is they're not maturing at the same rate that we are, and that's where I think that's the leadership aspect of what we need to do, which is not so much the I mentioned earlier about the tyranny of the urgent. I mean, most CISOs are controlled effectively in their day-to-day job by what are the latest and greatest issue they have to deal with. I think there's some evidence from the survey that our CISO community, this specific CISO community, but CISOs more generally, are becoming more executive aware. And what I mean by that is, getting the FaceTime, getting the conversations they need to have with the organization more broadly to advance cybersecurity. Now, look, I mean, there's a long way to go. I think all of us, the days of us having checkbooks that are blank, and we can just sign off what we want, and are we able to prioritize everything we want to do? No, I mean that we'll never be there. That's the reality of working in any environment. I think it's more in terms of our ability to do things like express risk in a fashion that is consumable by the executive team. And then the mitigation strategies that we're taking and the investments around that are consumable by an executive team. And I think there was lots of really good indicators and pointers, again, particularly in the interviews, where we see CISO specifically identifying tactics and approaches they have taken to be successful. Definitely. And so I think, back to your previous question about what do we need to do to move, if you write down those are the issues that I've got that I need, or the challenges I think I've got to move from 2 to a 3 or whatever scale it might be, I would really recommend looking at some of the interviews and taking some of the learnings and using that to plug those gaps. Again, it's not that anybody that answers the questionnaire, anybody in the alliance doesn't intellectually know the answer. It's just then, okay, well, that's what I need to do. What are then the steps I need to take? And look, I mean, it's a community, it's a network. We're all in this together, kind of thing. It's a team sport. So I would also recommend that, and I'm sure this happens, that it'll happen naturally, but reach out and have that conversation. If you've read something or you hear something that says, yeah, look, I could really do with having more discussion on that. I think I can speak for, maybe a bit presumptuous that I can speak for the whole of the alliance, but it would be, but I don't think anybody's going to say, oh no, I haven't got time to talk to you about it. I think people are going to sit down and say, this is a topic I want to continue, and I'll share with you what I think is happening. You share with me what you think is happening. And that's the real value of the survey itself. The data is interesting and helpful, but it's that ability to take those nuggets of people's individual experiences to deal with the problems that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's the joys of sort of the CISO alliances, and what we've got with the community is they are there to bounce ideas and to sit down with each other, whether it's over a cup of coffee or just on the phone, to bounce ideas across, with each other when it comes to stuff like that. So that is a really good, valid point on that. Thanks, Barry. So my last sort of question, just before we sort of move on to just saying thank you to the community, is from the report then, and just this is purely going to be your opinion now. Would you imagine any of those results changing drastically over the next sort of 2 years? You talk about that bell curve of there's still that element of people not doing things quite great, but the majority are in that middle zone. Would you imagine to see a rapid improvement in that, or is this going to be, the whole topic of this, and then it comes back to culture again? But do you think that's going to be more of a gradual thing over the next 2, 5, 7, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with a lot of these things, expectations move as well, right? So you may see that bell curve move because expectations have changed and so on. And being a 5 in terms of being excellent 2 years from now may be what it'll be a 2 years from now. Yeah, that kind of thing. So putting that to one side, I think there's a couple of things that were in the survey that I think personally need to improve, and I'm sure the community would agree. This is not particularly my personal insight. I think people understand these things need to improve, and one of them is around preparedness for a breach. So in the data, 55% of the respondents said that they were either not or ill prepared for a breach.
Yeah.
That also is also indicated that in one of the questions around how the board look at the chances of a breach. There was still a large portion of the community, large by relatively speaking, 20%, that were basically saying, I don't think it's a problem, and if it is, we'll worry about it when it happens. Now that may be, giving the benefit of the doubt to those respondents who work in those environments and those organizations. That may be because their business model and such is not very dependent, or at least appears to be not very dependent upon cybersecurity threats. But I think that indicates to me a little bit of a lack of awareness around how devastating this can be. We do crisis simulations with organizations, and you get that. As you go through it, you basically standard kind of crisis simulation. Here's the breach. This is what happens, and it escalates. You suddenly got the BBC sticking a microphone in your face. You've got the data that was in your organization that you thought was secure is no longer secure. They've put it onto the dark web. You can just see their faces. These people aren't cybersecurity professionals. They're the people who actually own the business risk. It's usually the combined with cybersecurity professionals, but you just see the awareness as they, could this really happen? And the answer is, well, absolutely it could. And no one in the survey is saying it can't happen. That, by the way, I'm not saying that. But if you're on this, we use the scale of 1 to 5, right? And if you look at the 1 and 2s of that breach question, it's 55% of people who don't think they're prepared. So over the next couple of years, and 2 years will pass very quickly, I personally, if we went back and asked that question again, would be hopeful that we'd see a movement towards, at least we're prepared for it, and we acknowledge that it's a reality. And one of the other things that came up in the survey, the conversation, or this conversation, and we have generally, is how do I explain to the board or to my executive team that I need to make these investments when they ask, they ask me questions like, are we secure? And the answer is no. And so if we spend this money, will we be secure? The answer is still no. And the answer is that is always going to be no matter how much money you give me. I mean, that's kind of a difficult position to be in. So it's that ability to try and communicate that you're managing risk. And I think the other takeaway, in terms of the data and the conversations we had, is it can't be the CISO that owns the risk. The business has to own the risk. And I see situations, and again, didn't necessarily come up in this survey, but if you again dig into some of the detail behind it, situations where I've heard CISO saying, I don't want any more help trying to find vulnerabilities in my organization, because if it does, I'm going to have to fix them. I'd rather ignore them. Now, I don't think that applies to the community that we work with, but it's that kind of response because they don't know how to go and get this. They don't know how to have those conversations. And then you say, well, look, it's not your risk. I mean, you're identifying it. Obviously, it's the business risk.
Yeah.
You need to find a business owner for that. Business don't want to know about it. Well, that kind of maturity in 2 years' time, I would love us not to be having those conversations because, and look, I mean, again, I'm not saying that's the predominant conversation or the predominant view, but there is enough in my reading of some of the data in the report, there is enough to indicate that there is the possibility of a lack of seriousness around the topic when it comes to that board level in interaction. It's not the majority, but it's enough to be concerned that if you're in that role as a CISO in that type of organization, that you probably need to find a wall and bang your head against it, because it must be totally frustrating having to move that type of thing. So that cultural shift from the business perspective is something I'd like to see improve or change over the next couple of years.
Bro, yeah. Ideally, ideally the report could help that when it comes to the different areas of the business, being able to help them understand where the CISO is coming from and what they're trying to get across to that executive team. But I just want to say thank you to you guys from Trustwave for sponsoring this project. It's been a pleasure working with you. The community, as far as I'm concerned, from what I've had back as feedback, have really enjoyed it. Like I said, what we've got with the alliances is around the objective of being able to get some valuable takeaways from whatever activities that we're doing, and I think this speaks volumes for that. So again, from my side, Barry, is a thank you to yourself and the rest of the team that I worked with at Trustwave when it came to this. Is there anything that you want to add to that, just to say to the community that got involved?
Well, I think it's very mutual, right? So in terms of, I want to thank the people for taking the time to do that. I mean, I know these things can sometimes feel a little bit mundane, filling in surveys and so on, but the quality of the responses was excellent. The engagement in the sessions was excellent. The interviews, and again, I'd emphasize that when people get to see the report, they read the interviews. People taking the time to do that, really, they didn't have to do that. I'm really, really grateful that they did. Going back to what you were saying about the 2 years thing, I'd love to go back and have this conversation not in 2 years' time, but a continuation of this conversation. Maybe take in a 2 years' time, take a temperature check again to see where we are. Look, in the meantime, I know the network will continue to work these types of conversations. I would very much like personally to be part of that. I mean, in terms of not just from a Trustwave perspective, but from a personal perspective, is to understand some of this conversation that you and I are having today, James. If anybody wants to have that conversation in a bit more detail, I'll definitely make my own time available for that. I would like to do that. So I'd put that out there for anybody that would want to follow up in that way. And then just a general thank you that when you made the report, right? It's not being James that made the report. It's the community that made the report. So it is yours. And so I would say, please use it. I know very often I get these results and you look at them and go, okay, well, that's really interesting. But I genuinely think, given the depth of the information that's in this, and again, it'd be interesting to hear people's opinions on whether the surprise is in there for them or not, or whether they thought this is pretty much what they thought anyway. But it's to please use the report as a tool to make some of the changes that we've talked about within your organization and or you personally, right? So there's a personal development piece to this. I think, and you mentioned that, James. I think that's a really good point. Is that a lot of the interaction or the ability to have interaction it's almost a confidence-based thing, right? So do I have the confidence to be able to talk to these folks? And I think there's those key takeaways that will build that confidence. And again, if anybody wants to practice on, what's it like working with a board, or how do you present certain information, I'd be only too happy to have those conversations.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Barry. So yeah, I really appreciate that, offering your time as well when it comes to speaking to the community. And I'll make sure if there is anyone that wants to reach out, that they've got your details. They should have it anyway, but I'll pass them on along again. And when this is out on, I want to say social media, but LinkedIn, we'll get you tagged in that, Barry, as well, so people can reach out to you in LinkedIn, email, whichever way is better. But yeah, I really appreciate the time today, but also through the project, Barry. It's been a pleasure speaking today, and it's been a pleasure working with you guys through the whole project. So just a massive thank you from me.
Likewise, and thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you, Barry.
Okay, cheers, James.